Pronti, sto aprendo l'audio del podio, in modo che senti un po' di fruscio, lo senti? Ok. Ciao, ciao, ciao.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I introduce to you the global governance student of the University of Rome Tor Vergata. We are a second-year student of an interdisciplinary course, and today I have the honor to introduce to you Giorgio Rutelli, the director of Formiche, and they are going to talk about the AI regulation. So give a round of applause.
Thank you and welcome. Welcome to the Centro Studi Americani, we thank the Centro Studi Americani for hosting us, and Diplomacy, the festival that is organizing this event. I will introduce the speakers today, and then I will let them talk about artificial intelligence, but from the point of view of this AI Act, that is basically the first big piece of legislation that is being drafted in the world concerning artificial intelligence. We will talk to Brando Benifei, who is going to join us live from Brussels. He's a member of the European Parliament and is the lead rapporteur on the AI Act. So he's the one that is following the process of drafting this piece of legislation that has been going through different stages. As you know, the Commission and the Council also have to, put their inputs and their views on this legislation, and then we have Cristina Laimo, who is a researcher on digital economy and society at Lewis University. We have Roberto Signorini, who is the head of institutional relations at ANIA, which is the Association of Insurance Companies in Italy. We have Anna Gressel, who is a counsel at Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton and Garrison, and she's a lawyer, and she'll talk about the legal side of things. And Andrea Cosentini, who is the head of credit strategies at Intesa San Paolo, and he will give us the perspective of the biggest bank in Italy and how they are adapting to this new legislation and to this new regulatory system. Because as you know, the European Union has basically given itself the role of the big regulator in terms of digital policies. And this is something that's viewed by some as a power, and we call ourselves a regulatory superpower, and by some as a liability, as a weakness, because it's something that might stifle innovation, it might delay innovation, because the fact that European companies have huge hurdles in terms of compliance, in terms of legal requirements, is seen by very innovative companies as something that is very difficult to enact as policies. You've seen maybe that Elon Musk is threatening to leave to basically make X.com not available in Europe because of the Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act is one of the main pieces of legislation that has been enacted in the past year. Actually, it came into force in the past year. It's been in the works for many years. And now with the Digital Markets Act and the Data Governance Act and the Data Act and now the AI Act forms this big corpus of European legislation. I'm going to ask if Brando Benifei is connecting. Well, is he? Chiedo alla regia se si è connesso. Ancora no. Okay, so we'll give Brando Benifei the floor as soon as he connects. But so, as I was saying, this is a big issue because, eccolo, perfetto.
Salve, scusate, sorry for the delay. I was blocked in a meeting in the Parliament. Sorry.
No problem. I was just introducing the fact that the European Union is working on this AI Act. You are one of the lead rapporteurs that is following the works for the European Parliament. And so I wanted to ask you, where are we now in terms of the process of enacting this very important piece of legislation? And also, how is this legislation being received by the stakeholders, companies and associations, and also maybe the United States? Because as we know, digital regulation is one of those issues in which the European Union and United States sometimes do not see the same way, do not act the same way. There is this new forum, or newish because it's been a couple of years now, that's called the Trade and Technology Council, that it's been meeting, and so it's creating this bridge between the US and the European Union. It's a forum in which the two sides discuss digital policy, discuss big commercial issues. So there's the will to come to a common ground and to come to a common understanding between the EU and the US. But now I will leave the floor to Brando Benifei to tell us a little bit more about what's been going on the side of regulation. Thank you.
Yes, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. I'm sorry again for being late, but I was in fact in a meeting preparing another meeting that we will have in about 1 hour internally in the Parliament to prepare tomorrow. Tomorrow we will have a big round of negotiations that will start in the evening and will last until probably late night. We do not have an ending time because we want to try to get to an agreement on some crucial aspects of this regulation. I will get to that, but just to say that this debate and this meeting of today in the Festival of Diplomacy is coming in a crucial moment for the ongoing work. In fact, in parallel to this, I want to immediately give you the international context that was mentioned now in the last part of the introduction. In fact, I just came back a few days ago from the Internet Governance Forum in Kyoto, where there were some meetings at the fringe that were useful for the advancement of an international commitment that the G7 countries are promoting, that is called the Hiroshima process, regarding the generative AI code of conduct and general principles on artificial intelligence. This is one example of international cooperation on one of the most important aspects, how we regulate the generative AI, which is a specific but very important area of artificial intelligence, especially looking at the potential impact for democracy and debate and information. But also we can say, just to give you an example, that the regulation has worked a lot on the issue of definitions together with the OECD. So we are trying to be aligned with the work of the OECD when we look at some of the definitions that we have put in this regulation, which, for example, when defining an AI system, a system of artificial intelligence, looks exactly at what we have been doing at OECD level. So just these were a few examples to say that this work, of which I will tell you now, is inside a larger effort that is happening at a global level, that is already happening. But the difference, for sure, this is the big difference of this approach that we are taking domestically in Europe, is the fact that we are promoting a regulation, not just a recommendation, a code of conduct, a voluntary agreement, but a regulation, which means that is the strongest possible legislative instrument that the European Union can take, because it's an instrument that will be immediately applicable in its form without adaptation in each member state, differently from a directive that will have national application laws. So what is the spirit of this regulation? The idea is to reduce as much as possible the risks that come from AI deployment, especially looking at the dimensions of health, safety, and fundamental rights, with also a subsidiary connection to the issue of democracy and environment as other important elements in the scope that are in fact there when we see the intake of AI in our society. We do not want to over-regulate. So the idea is to identify with this regulation different levels of risks that AI entails, so that the low-risk AI, which for sure are the majority of systems and their use cases, are only limitedly regulated by this regulation, with mostly with general principles. Because to be honest, AI is not moving in an empty space. Today, without this regulation, which is still not there, AI still has already to respect laws. For example, in Italy, ChatGPT was suspended for some time, not due to AI Act, but due to data protection laws. So AI is already regulated. What we do is to identify some use cases of AI that are particularly risky, and we work so that through a conformity assessment done by the providers of these AI systems, these risks can be reduced. So the objective is building trust, is building a message to our consumers and citizens that we will have the best rules to avoid risks and make the best of the opportunities and the advantages that the intake of AI, that we want to be there as strong as possible, can give to our society. This means identifying high risk, as I said, high risk use cases. For example, when we deal with children development, when we deal with administration of justice, when we deal with health, when we deal with democratic processes, when we deal with the attribution of civil or social rights to citizens. These are areas that, with some exceptions that I will not look into now because they are still under negotiation, but also they are too long to explain, with some exceptions, these areas are the ones where we identify the high-risk applications. I mentioned a few, there are more, also, for example, the workplace use of AI, but there are some categories. They are in the Annex 3 of this regulation. You will be able to look at that. We also come to the level of identifying use cases that we think are too risky, that should be prohibited. This means, for example, the use of emotion recognition in workplaces and in schools. We propose to ban the predictive policing, also the use of biometric cameras for surveillance in real time in public spaces. We do not forbid the use of biometric cameras, but we forbid the use in public spaces in real time for surveillance, because we link instead that to the persecution of specific crimes and with the role of the judicial authorization. But when we look back to the high risk, what do we try to prevent? Well, the requirements that we put for the developers, for the providers, as we call them in the text, are related to several issues. Several issues. I give you a few examples. Data appropriateness, for example, avoiding that curricula selection programs will be trained learning that women and not white people are never able to do more important jobs, because some systems that are already being used have learned that through the data they have been trained with, that based on the fact that they were trained on all cases that were discriminating women and people not white, they learned that this should be the rule. This is a very easy example and very obvious example of this kind of algorithmic biases that we want to contrast with these rules. So appropriateness and quality of data. Data governance, because where do the data, think of when they use the systems in a school with minors, where do their data end, the one that is captured by the AI? Is it protected enough? And this is also connected to cybersecurity. Then there is another aspect. Then we have environmental impact of AI, which is a big issue. Also in positive, because AI can help us reduce the environmental impact in general. Also human oversight, capacity of correction of errors in terms of timing and preciseness, etc. So we have some requirements. As I told you, we also have forbidden uses, and I can very briefly, just to go to conclusion, indicate which are the points that we are negotiating now with the member states, which are mostly of big interest, of big discussion. I partly mentioned them because definition of high risk, how we identify a high risk system, so with all that entails in terms of obligations, is one big thing. The other big thing is the prohibitions and the links also to exceptions related to national security, which is obviously a very sensitive topic to discuss between parliament and executives. Third issue is the governance. Everything that we are saying will never be any real if there is no authorities supervising and executing this work. So we are looking at how we build the network of the supervisory authorities in Europe, and also a European AI office that in the proposal of the Parliament has been strengthened a lot. The original proposal of the Commission was, I mean, in my view, was a bit contradictory, because it was clearly making a lot of harmonization with the regulation of this kind, but then the governance at the EU level was weak. The office was very weak. Instead, we are giving more powers to have more coordination, more harmonization, also learning from what we have seen with the GDPR and the limits of the implementation. So this is the third big thing. The fourth, and I conclude on this, which I know is the most debated, most politically central today, and maybe the most important, interesting also maybe for the people there, is the foundation models and generative AI, which is our experience with AI for many, many people today. On this aspect, we are building some obligations for particularly powerful models that have a specific high degree of computing capacity. We are discussing the criteria and also which obligations to give them. But I can tell you that this is the only exception to a principle that is all over this regulation. That is the risk-based approach strictly applied. We look at the risks and the concrete risks, and we regulate accordingly. On the very powerful models, because they have a potential to be risky and to be harmful because of their being a general purpose, they are not focused on one use case specifically, we deviate partially to the principle. And so with a very limited focus, we also ask for requirements for these models to enter our markets that are, we can say, pre-use. They are based on how they work. And we think it's needed for a very limited number of models that are particularly powerful. And then the generative AI, which is one of the most evident uses of these models, for that we entail some transparency requirements, which are all very much debated today. I see also in the national media. One is the so-called watermarking of AI-produced content. We want to make AI-produced content to be recognizable. You understand how easy it could be to today with AI and the deepfakes techniques to produce videos where a person can say horrible things about others, and this could have huge consequences also in our democracies. I'm sure you can think of a lot of examples. So this is something that needs to be put into some control. In our view, it needs to be transparent so we can fight disinformation and build also a more healthy environment for the development of AI-generated content. We also want to require as much as possible the developers to work so that the systems cannot be used to produce illegal content or to pursue illegal objectives. And thirdly, in a scale of complicateness, because this last is probably the most difficult technically, is the protection of copyright holders, and so to fight copyright infringements. It's not easy to deal with this topic because, I mean, I've worked in the past mandate on copyright legislation, and we do not want to change the fact that we have text and data mining exceptions, that we have a certain kind of copyright context. But we want to give transparency, we want to give instruments to the authors and the creatives so that they can know what has happened, and the opt-outs can be there effectively, and they can build some leverage in front of the developers of these systems to defend their legitimate rights as copyrighted material producers. So I gave you an overview of the areas. These ones that I listed finally are the ones where we are mostly negotiating today, I mean in these days. And this is the state of the debate. Then finally, we hope we can conclude by the end of the year. This is our objective. And then there will be some time before full entry into force comes into reality. In this time, we will promote a so-called AI Pact, a voluntary compliance program that the European Commission will launch with the support of Parliament, so that gradually everyone will adapt to the new legislation before it becomes an obligation. As an Italian, I must underline that this is crucial, because I remember when GDPR entered into force, I remember the letters of businesses saying, oh, in 1 month I need to do all of this and I am not ready, please ask for a derogation. But this was due to the fact that the member states and maybe the European Union itself didn't really prepare effectively the transition and the compliance in a gradual way. So we are going to work very hard on this, because we hope that some of the developers, for example, will be ready to respect the rules before the European elections, because some of our of the ideas in this regulation will be crucial again for defending democratic processes in the upcoming elections, when the AI Act will not be entered into force already, but the voluntary compliance can be very, very important. And I can tell you that Parliament supports, but also Commissioner Breton is very much involved in this, and I think justly prioritize this effort for the next months. I hope I gave you an idea where we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you to Brando Benifei from the European Parliament. So I think we can now move to the second speaker. I don't know if Brando Benifei maybe has some minutes for second questions later from the public, but I think he has to disconnect.
Unfortunately, I have a meeting for the AI Act, as I said.
We will also have this chance to thank you for joining us, and you know, have a good time negotiating this very difficult piece of legislation. Thank you again for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
So, Dr. Alaimo, we are now facing a new framework for artificial intelligence. We are trying to create a set of principles, a way to handle data in this huge system, revolutionary system that is, as we have seen, so many implications in terms of personal rights, political rights, copyright, so intellectual property. Can you give us an overview of what are the key issues to deal with, to start with, and then we can deal with more vertical topics with legal, banking, insurance, with other speakers?
Definitely. Thank you so much. First, let me thank you, of course, the organizer for having me here, this event, and my fellow panelists, and you, and all of you guys here. So I'm going to start with something that perhaps is close to what you are studying, and is one of my research interests, which is try to look at the political economy of AI. What does that mean, and what kind of implication does it have for the AI Act? So AI is very rarely a product or an application, despite this being a little bit the framing of the AI Act. But is rather a complex ecosystem of organizations, institutions, countries, culture, data, technologies, new technologies that we didn't expect to be so powerful up until what, a few months ago? So this is something which is very important to consider when we, of course, have the assumption to regulate AI by regulating only the output. So you see, you have these very big sequences of steps that are involved in producing an AI application or a services that goes around countries, organization, and society. And then you, of course, look, this is the perspective adopted by the AI Act at the end of it, the case-based approach. So this is, of course, something we need to look into, because it may be very problematic to look at the output and having the assumption of regulated what comes before. It may be very problematic during the phase of implementation, of governance. How do you redistribute responsibilities, for instance, along the whole chain? So I'm talking of all these actors that enter in producing this huge system, very complex system, where data circulate, technologies enter interoperable with one another. So I guess that the foundation model and the generative AI give us the perfect example of what I'm saying. So all of a sudden you have something which is not case-based, domain-specific, but yet it has the possibility of disrupting how things have been done in any domain. From education, so low, moderate risk, to high risk, to even low risk. So how then you enter into regulating this? And perhaps Brando Benifei was touching upon and was anticipating something, and we still don't know that they are making exception just to tackle this issue, which is very important. So I guess that for you, it's important also to think that all of what I'm saying has a strong geopolitical dimension. And here I am, because of course many of these organizations, many of these power holders, for instance, are in different countries that have different regulatory framework, that approach how technology is produced in different ways. So I guess this is perhaps the first point that I want to touch, and I want to also sort of throw to the students in order to open up the debate. A strong geopolitical dimension of the AI ecosystems that we still don't know very much how it works. We don't know which actor participate into it. We don't know which are the most powerful actor. It's very dynamic and it changes all the time.
Thank you. So we'll go back to this. We'll have 2 rounds with each speaker, and we can also respond to other panelists' points in the next round. So what is the perspective, Mr. Cosentini? What is the perspective of a big bank in terms of regulation in AI? How is Intesa Sanpaolo responding to this huge legislation coming up, and how is your company evolving and adapting to this changed framework?
Thank you, the organization, thank you. Artificial intelligence is, a very powerful tool for every industry, but in special way for the banking industry, because the banks owns a lot of data, and you know that artificial intelligence models, machine learning models, are more effective how much data for the training of the models. So in Intesa Sanpaolo we started dealing with machine learning solutions 7 years ago. We have now more efficient process and commercial campaign more effective thanks to artificial intelligence. So we know very well this technology is potential, but we know very well also the potential danger of this technology. And so we are aware of this possible disadvantage that the technology could arise to individuals and society. So we created in 2019 a dedicated team for trustworthy AI, responsible AI. The team is composed from data scientists, philosophers, and also legal, because we believe that the approach must be multidisciplinary. So with this experience, we welcome the Artificial Intelligence Act that has a very ambitious goal, as Mr. Benifei told us, not only to ensure that the internal market for AI systems is good, but above all, it aims to protect the interest of European citizens and safeguards the fundamental rights for the citizens, the health, and the safety. Well, what is the impact for the bank? Obviously, new strategy compliant to the regulation, a new process, and in special case for the high risk use cases that Mr. Benifei mentioned, like recruiting or personal loans, we need a new supervision of the process and obviously new cost for the bank. But in our opinion, the regulation that we have seen, that we have studied, is well written, is balanced very well the need to protect citizens and not discouraging the innovation. So we believe that the European Parliament and Council is doing very well.
Okay, thank you. Anna Gressel, your point of view as a lawyer for an American law firm, as now we've been discussing the side of things from the European point of view. Of course, the United States is in a different position, and the global situation, we have global governance students here. Us Europeans would like to think that our legislation has the so-called Brussels effect that can also basically push other legislations, other countries to get in line with our point of view, because we're a big market, we're 500 million people, and but please tell us a little bit more what's right now happening in the world of artificial intelligence from a legal point of view, because for the moment, concretely, there is no real law, neither national nor international. You have some states like Italy that has, done something in terms of emergency administrative process with the data protection authority. We have California that, as American states, is working on its own a little bit, creating its own framework and hoping that other states and hoping that the federal level will follow. But in the end, right now, we are at the beginning of this revolution, and so we are really curious to know how it's evolving in terms of legal perspective.
That's a great question. And hello, everyone. I'm Anna Gressel. So I work at a law firm, and I counsel major corporations that are largely global corporations on AI laws and regulations. And I've been doing this for about 5 years. So we're at a very interesting inflection point, particularly now with generative AI. And we can talk more about regulation of generative AI, I think, in a moment. But from the US perspective, this legal discussion on how to regulate AI has been going on since around 2018, when regulators began to look at the technologies being deployed, particularly in regulated industries like insurance and banking, and ask the question, are our current laws and regulations enough? And if not, what else should we be doing? And so right now in the US, I would say at a very high level, we have a situation in which we have emerging laws and regulations that people are proposing to deal with AI. In the US, very few of them have passed, although some have. But for the most part, regulators are becoming very vocal about their belief that current laws do apply, and they're beginning to do what we call enforcement around this. They're beginning to actually bring actions testing how those laws apply to AI and showing that actually they are tools that the regulators can use. And so we're seeing this happen, for example, around sectoral regulation, so around issues like employment and housing, where the regulators are being very vocal and trying to actually test out how the regulations apply to these very different and new technologies. We're also seeing enforcement actions in areas, or discussions of enforcement actions in areas like banking and insurance, and new regulations being proposed in those areas, along with, as you mentioned, state legislation, state and municipal, even at the city level legislation in the US. So what we have in the US, I would say, is largely a very fragmented but active regulatory arena where everyone is trying to get involved and trying to propose regulations that are meant to really deal with all of these concrete risks. It's a very use case based approach, I would say, right now. And it is very much tailored to trying to prevent risk at the point of deployment or the point of use. I do think, though, that from a global perspective, the European AI Act, the EU AI Act looms large. And it is very important to many of our clients. It is very important to the discussion globally, because we do see regulators looking to the EU and borrowing pieces of what is happening in the EU and trying to implement those within national or state legislative approaches. And we see, I would say, echoes of the EU AI Act in the legislation that's being proposed in the US and globally. I would say Canada, Brazil, for example, they're beginning to pick up on those threads. And so where does this come to, I would say, a point of tension right now? It really is around the regulation of generative AI, because that does test the framework. I think Mr. Benefei said this perfectly. It tests the framework in terms of whether you're really regulating a use case. I think no longer can that be true with generative AI. Now we're starting to think about regulating a technology, and that technology stack is increasingly complex. I would say when I used to talk about generative AI 6 months ago, what I would talk about are a variety of actors, providers of foundation models, companies adopting foundation models and tuning them for their own environments, users who are using ChatGPT and other models internal to their workplace or out in the public, who are beginning to toy with those models and try to deploy them for their own purposes, and then even cloud providers or downstream systems that are affected. Now I would say we're seeing a merging of some of those areas in a way that I think is, even over the next year or two, going to test the frameworks that are being proposed. And what do I mean by that? We're actually seeing companies that are not big tech companies think about creating their own foundation models. We're seeing companies talk about layering foundation models together to create even more powerful systems, but those foundation models may not come from the same company. And so this complexity, this kind of texture that we're seeing in the generative AI space is going to create very challenging issues around how to define what risk we're actually trying to regulate and what the right lever is to regulate that risk. Is it around the capability of the system, the number of users, the computing power? Is it around the kind of company deploying the system? I think these are major questions that we're seeing the European Commission, Parliament, Council deal with in the trilogue process, but these are also questions that come up legally in the US through court cases that are testing who should be liable. In the absence of a centralized regulatory framework, who is the actor that should be liable for these systems when something happens? So this is a major point of discussion right now, and I think one where there's room for conversation among the US and the EU, and really some interesting tension points that have us ask, what are the right tools that we have at our fingertips, and how do we think about risk concretely in the world of AI where things are moving so quickly?
Thank you. And to add a little point to what we have Professor Cristianini connected with us, and I will give him the floor. Something that is really interesting, and I speak from a journalistic point of view, is what's happening in the US right now with a big lawsuit that is being pushed by Barry Diller, who is this mogul, this media magnate mogul that is a little bit old style, and he wants to defend, the copyright material of publishers of movies. And so this is another key part of the equation, the fact that in the US, you can have very big judicial precedent that decides some huge questions that have not actually been tackled by politics because you have a very fragmented political situation. And so we should also look at, and I am looking at that with a lot of curiosity, because as journalists, as people working in the media, we are quite afraid of what's going to happen to our jobs, but also the way that our data, the things that we write, the things that we produce, have been scraped by artificial intelligence and large language models to create these big chatbots, and so it's a very complex situation, because the European Union is deciding and is going through this whole big process, but then it might be a judge in the US that actually has a big role in deciding what's going to happen next. So as I was saying, we have connected with us Professor Nello Cristianini, and he's a professor of artificial intelligence at the University of Bath. And I will ask him, we're now discussing legislation, we're discussing how to regulate artificial intelligence, but maybe there's a previous question that we should ask. How did we get to the current AI models, the current AI technology, and how the way that we chose, or the way that these different models have been chosen, is affecting legislation and will affect the way in which we regulate artificial intelligence?
Yes, good morning. I'm sorry I'm late. I was teaching exactly the class of artificial intelligence until a few minutes ago. And yeah, there are 280 first-year-old students who want to know. This is a very strange moment for us in the university and outside. There is a lot of attention, and it's good to see people are regulating this, because the time is right. So I cannot predict the future. I don't envy the difficult job of the parliament trying to regulate the future. I can help understand the present, and that's where I probably should stop. And it's obvious that what we see today is not new. It is not particularly new. AI wasn't even born with ChatGPT, although of course something has shifted. And a lot of the problems we find today in front of us have been slowly cooking for a long time. And some of them have accelerated, and I agree there is now a sense of urgency. But how did we get here can help us a great deal to save energy. So first of all, the present version of AI, the one that is based on data, massive amounts of data and statistical patterns, is not the result of a choice. It was the only path we found to do certain things. We didn't have a lot of options to do translation or to do self-driving vehicles and face recognition. We were taken to this place because this is the path that works, and the other path didn't work. Though that limits a lot what we can discuss. And the first decision we made very early in the 90s was to give up on mathematical models of language or of images or intelligence, and fall back on statistical patterns. The use of statistical patterns allowed us, for the first time in the 90s, to recommend books, recommend videos, check the spelling and translate documents. All that was done through statistical patterns. Now they've grown larger because GPT 3.5 has 175 billion parameters. It still is a statistical model, which means it's very hard to understand what is inside, to modify, to change, to interpret, for that reason. And second, if you want to train something like this, you must have data. We didn't want or couldn't afford making data by asking school teachers to give us examples of text. We harvested it from the web, what we call data pre-existent in the wild. That is the word we use, in the wild. So if you go in the wild and gather data, what you find is blogs, forums, discussions, Wikipedia, sometimes books, newspapers. And from those, you learn the meaning of words, and now also how to interpret a sentence, how to recognize a face. It's all done from data in the wild. And then we had a third problem. These are all the shortcuts we took. The first shortcut was to use patterns, and the second shortcut was to harvest data in vast quantities from the web. And the third shortcut has been to observe the user constantly, to interpret what they want. Instead of asking them what kind of video would you like to watch today on YouTube, we just look at them, what they click in the past, and we infer this is their preference. Third shortcut. So these three shortcuts are present across the board, from TikTok to machine translation to the Tesla car, all the way down to GPT. That's a fundamental part of the recipe of today. Not for choice, because that is what works. Now, regulating this is not easy. When the Italian Privacy Authority decided to object to GPT for two reasons, they couldn't guarantee the information was accurate, and they couldn't guarantee personal data hasn't been used for training. I understand that was the concern they had. They were directly touching on the first and the second shortcut. A statistical mechanism cannot guarantee accuracy in every case, and a mechanism based on harvesting data in the wild will also harvest personal data along the way. So it's obviously quite serious, the mismatch between our practices and what we want to have. And it's not easy to find a middle ground. That is what the Parliament is today, and I'm glad I'm not there. It's not easy. Now, what can we do? If you ask, we want to inspect the knowledge in these systems so we can make sure there is no bias. Not easy when you are looking at 175 million parameters that cannot be interpreted by human. When you ask for the machine to respect privacy, not easy when your only way to model users is to observe them and create a database of personal behavior. So we are here for a reason. We are not here because a lot of different things went wrong. We are here because the same thing keeps on giving us the same problems: transparency, fairness, auditability, privacy. And then there is the point, separate entirely, that we put these machines in a very specific central position in our infrastructure where they can decide who reads the news and so on. That is a separate decision we made. And the influence on public opinion will be a topic during the next 3 election campaigns in 2024. It will be discussed a lot. We don't know yet what was the effect really of AI in the 2016 and 2020 campaigns in the US. We haven't measured it. It would be nice to measure these things. And we don't know the well-being, health effect on children, for example, or vulnerable adults of constant exposure to this technology. We have very little information about well-being. We know of concerns about addiction in teenagers. Few measurements were made. We know of concerns about the political polarization and radicalization. Not many measurements, many anecdotes have found, and so on. So at this point, it's clear that regulating this will be difficult because we can't inspect, but we can't unplug. And we are in this crazy place, we can't unplug it. At the same time, other countries are competing with us, so we can't stop. So I find that the idea of looking at the risk levels, regulating the highest risk, without slowing down the process of the low risk or no risk applications, for the time being, is very wise, because we don't have the luxury of blocking anything, while the others, companies, countries, keep on making fast progress. So that's my personal opinion.
Thank you. We can go back to another part of your speech in the second round. Roberto Signorini, what is the point of view of insurance companies? Of course, insurance companies can benefit from AI because you can make the process more efficient. You can give a lot of algorithms to determine, risk and profiles of clients. And so there's already been a lot of AI use in the insurance market at least since the insurance market has gone online. But then what are the risks going forward in a widespread use of artificial intelligence in the sector?
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody. It's true, insurance sector is strongly impacted from AI, AI is reshaping business process from underwriting to claims management and customer engagement. Benefits include its potential to help reduce protection gaps by improving the availability, affordability, and accessibility of insurance on the back of increased personalization and improved cost efficiency. For example, AI application in the insurance sector are already giving rise to efficiency gain, helping to contribute to improve customer experience. Customer want a new product and services that respond to their needs, and the added convenience of interacting with their insurance when, how, and where they want, making it a day-to-day experience. Then AI contribute to more effective fraud detection. Detected and undetected fraud is estimated to cost European insurance more or less 13 billion a year. So you can imagine the importance that AI-driven fraud detection solution can tackle this problem of fraud by analyzing massive amount of data from multiple sources in order to spot fraudulent claims. Then AI contribute also to a better risk monitoring and prevention. As the insurance industry focus more on prevention, AI system can be used to help monitor and predict risk, as well as to provide advice to customer on how to reduce risk going forward. This can in turn help to reduce the frequency and severity of losses over time. And then AI application can also offer the opportunity for lower insurance premium at this time. This is the benefits. I know if you want also, because there are also some risk, maybe in the second round also.
Okay, we can go maybe through the risk in the second round.
Yeah, also because for instance, the rise of generative AI tools like ChatGPT has brought the risk and challenge of AI into the spotlight. And within the insurance industry, key concern include a lack of transparency and explainability, discrimination, unfairness, exclusion, and data-related issues. But these issues are not necessarily new to insurance, but emerge through a different channel as a result of the use of AI. Insurance are adopting various measures to address this specific risk, such as methodologies for detecting and preventing unwanted correlation in AI models, following AI governance principles such as those issued by EIOPA, the supervisory European authority, self-imposed limitation of the number of rating factors used in underwriting and governance structure tailored to manage AI-related risk. So importantly, the reversible nature of AI decision in insurance means that the associated risk differ significantly from those in other domains. In any case, AI also come with challenges that policy maker and business need to assess and if necessary also to address. Within that, in any case, any legal framework for AI should align with European overarching goal of promoting and encouraging innovation, while insurance adherent to European values and principles. And then regulatory framework must evolve in tandem to assure the ethical, responsible, and fair use of AI technologies without hindering insurance capacity for innovation. I think this is really important.
Thank you. But I think we can also agree on the fact that the financial and insurance sectors are two of the most regulated sectors. And I think that they're the sectors that are more ready and more they're already in a compliance thinking mode as we speak, because they have been dealing with very thorough regulation for many years. So I think that the transition, especially in the European Union, can be managed more easily than in other sectors that have been less regulated and less that they have less authorities following them. And so I think it's also a question of scale. So I think it's one of those sectors that we should not be so afraid of, actually. I think we're quite confident that we can manage for now, but for what we've seen until now. So Dr. Alaimo, on your second part of your speech, you were about to talk about the importance of data and also the evidence-based approach.
Yeah, thank you. I think the issue of data is something that sort of was present and very important in all the intervention that preceded me, and even in the last one. However, I would like to point to the fact that very often data are looked from a very kind of narrow sense perspective, like the inputs to this vast AI system, which they are, but they are also the output themselves, so the product, or huge production processes. What I mean by that? For instance, social media activity, online activities, even, wearables and other kind of pieces of software, hardware and devices are producing data that didn't exist before. So they are actually procuring this kind of data-driven innovation. That is also what we've been seeing in the last few years. So there is now a vast amount of data that didn't exist before, that can be conjoined or cross-referenced with other vertical or sectoral data, and can give rise to interesting opportunities and very dangerous situation, huge risks. So what I would like to say is that the European Union has, of course, given much attention to the issue of data. We have tons of regulation around data, DMA, DSA, Data Act, Data Governance Act, and now the AI Act, among others. This can create quite a bit also confusion or issues. So in the AI Act, there is a little bit about data, but not much. So this is perhaps also something that we should open the discussion around. How do we frame, or how do we think about a risk-based approach, which is certainly the most interesting aspect of the AI regulation, and how do we relate it to data? In a kind of provocatory mode, I would like to say that a risk-based approach can be also thought even thinking only about data. So to be blunt, like a biometric application can be less risky than a chatbot if it has in place, kind of monitored data processing, cleaning, labeling, and so on and so forth. Now, this is a provocatory statement, of course, because the use case is also very relevant. But at the same time, it's just sort of to tell you and to open up the debate on the issue that this wave of AI that we are seeing is very much based around data. So perhaps also spending more time discussing the whole area of data production, data circulation, data work. How does it happen within organization, but also across organization, which is also related to many other issues that now are emerging with generative AI. And I want to say something very important also for you guys. Data are not just technical issues. There is a whole political economy of data. I repeat this sentence, which is very important, which is what actor, organizations, what modalities are in place in the production, circulation, and use of data. All of these are issues that are open to debate and to, I would say, the work of social scientists, international relation experts, and scholars that have not been exactly interested into data issues so far. But now we need them, because data have become so important and so relevant and so central that we need absolutely a multidisciplinary approach that looks into this practice and is able to contribute to the regulation and the debate. Just a sentence on the evidence-based approach, because the data took quite a lot of time. By evidence-based approach, I just want to say that we also need to recognize, and we do it when we talk about this stuff, that we know very little of what is going on in this moment. both in traditional organization and traditional sectors, but also in innovative sector, such as the whole ecosystem that is emerging around generative AI. So we have scattered evidence. We have the lack of channel of communication among the institutions that are studying these issues. I think the role of the regulator should also be to construct an infrastructure of incentives, of access possibility, particularly to researcher, public institution, public-private partnership, board, whatever institution, you know, the regulator have in mind, they look into what is going on right now across sector and vertically across the different actors of the ecosystem. Why? Because a case-based approach is not sufficient any longer. We need to come up with standards that are applicable across cases, across sectors, and can open up a debate which is, you know, kind of update for the age of generative AI.
Thank you. So, Mr. Cosentini, we've been talking about what banks have done until now. We have said that the banking system is quite ready for this revolution, but how is it going to look in some years? How is it going to act on artificial intelligence?
Let me say before one thing. You said that insurance and banking are strongly regulated. It's true, but in my opinion, in Italy, in Europe, insurance and banking are also strongly self-regulated. There is a very strong compliance internally in insurance and banking. Why? Because the reputation of a bank, of an insurance, is the gold for the company. So, in my experience, for example, our bank, but also other banks, have already issued internally some guidelines for use of artificial intelligence based on the preliminary version of the Artificial Intelligence Act. There are already some tools able to assess and mitigate bias of machine learning algorithms, discrimination, for example, or there are a lot of tools that are able to explain the output of the algorithms. So, in my opinion, your question, in my opinion, in a few years, this AI market will be so strong, it will be maybe a commodity, the AI algorithm, but will be very, very important the process where the artificial intelligence solutions are working in the future. This is my opinion. And now there are a lot of applied research on trustworthy AI, responsible AI, and in few years these topics will be in mainstream, will be shared in every industry.
Thank you. So, Anna Gressel, you know, continuing on your discussion about the legal and legal complexity that AI will entail, how do you see the coming future in terms of the American system, the European system? Are they going to be able to come to a common ground? Are they going to, or is maybe Europe a little bit, you know, destined to be lagging behind US that is running ahead? And because, you know, then we have a third way, which is China, and of course, in which We know that there is a lot of advancement in artificial intelligence, although a lot of that artificial intelligence is used for facial recognition and for, the whole surveillance state part of technology. But so what is your, overview on the near future in this field on the legal side?
That's a great question. I think it's everyone's question right now. As we're watching what happens in Europe, we're watching what happens in the US, and folks are trying to figure out, where is this going to go in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? I think what I'm seeing at a very high level is, at least from my perspective, we're seeing Europe far ahead from a regulatory perspective, other than with sectoral regulation in the US. So banking regulators, insurance regulators are very active in the US. The FDA is active. We're seeing regulators in certain areas active in the US, but largely Europe is in the lead. Whereas you mentioned before, the US might go faster is with liability. And what do I mean by that? In the US, we have a system where people can bring cases to courts, and regulators themselves can bring cases to courts to result in decisions. And sometimes those decisions take years to be finally resolved. I mean, copyright in particular is notorious for having the cases resolved a generation potentially after the technology was put on the market, and it takes a long time for some of those cases to go to the Supreme Court, but not every case takes that long. And in the US, we can move often more quickly than would be expected on particular cases, particular tests of how the legal system should be applied. So what does that mean from the perspective of companies developing AI? And I don't mean, my clients, I just mean thinking really broadly. If you're a company, what does this actually mean from a practical perspective? It means that to a certain extent, it is beneficial to develop governance and compliance mechanisms that are tailored to what you think the law might look like from a regulatory approach in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. And that's generally what we're seeing. We're seeing companies say, regardless of what the laws look like today, we want to abstract principles and implement a risk-based approach that we think will be defensible, because building a compliance system, like building an AI system, it's a huge amount of work and effort internally. It takes a lot of people, and it's a big investment and a huge cost to companies to do that. So they want to build systems for compliance that are durable. On the liability side, however, there's just a tremendous amount of unpredictability, because that is much harder to control. Those are questions that arise after the systems have been built, about how to take responsibility for the systems, or even how to adjudicate the consequences of unintended actions that maybe no one foresaw. And those are very, very difficult questions, particularly as the ecosystem gets more complex. So the liability side, we're largely seeing legally contracts come into play, trying to decide between companies, how do they think liability should be allocated, and going forward with a negotiated allocation of liability. And that tends to work fairly well, except that it may not match up with every regulatory framework. There are some frameworks, like in banking, for example, I think is a good example of this, where some liability can't be allocated to someone else. Banks just retain certain types of liability or responsibility, or they may be able to allocate, but then have to supervise. And so it's a complex, I would say, knitting together of those two types of frameworks. First, what do you do to prevent harm? And second, what do you do once harm might occur? And we're beginning to see those come together regardless of whether you're in the US or the EU, really seeing those issues begin to knit together, and companies having to think about both sides of that when it comes to AI, because it does affect how they supervise, it does affect the controls they put in place, and it affects the contracts they put in place. So it's a very, I would say it's a very interesting question, and really what we're seeing is, as much as possible, companies trying to have foresight and think about how to answer and deal with those consequences in advance.
Thank you. So, Professor Cristianini, I wanted to add something that is, since we've been talking about the AI Act in Europe, the United Kingdom, where you work and teach, has actually left the European Union, as we all know, and in March has published a white book on artificial intelligence. And in this white book, the UK basically say, hey, listen, everybody, we will never create a law on artificial intelligence. We will only create guardrails. We can only create principles around artificial intelligence because we want to attract investment companies. We want to look like we are the big field on which companies can run and can exercise their freedom of enterprise and research. And they make the example inside this white book of saying that a chatbot that will tell you, what kind of jeans you should wear, or what kind of size is right for you, cannot be regulated the same way as a complex medical machine that will deal with maybe an oncology procedure. And right now, that's what basically they're accusing the EU of trying to do, putting everything on the same floor and creating this huge regulatory hurdle that will stop companies from investing and from researching. What is your perspective from the UK? Is the environment around that country different as in the rest of the European continent, and is it becoming a new AI hub?
Well, every country has a different culture. In Europe, you can travel from east, from Latvia to Portugal. You will find very different attitudes about these things, not only in the UK. So 2 weeks ago, a BBC journalist was interviewing me about the AI Act, and they made the example of remote biometrics, which is the... Can you hear me? You look very confused.
Yes, I can hear you, but can we ask la regia, scusate se possiamo mettere in full screen il professore? Regia? Possiamo? Adesso sì, ci pensa Valentina, grazie. Please go on. We can hear you, we will see you very tiny, but we will see you at the decent side very quickly.
Well, you're not missing much. All right, so the idea is the culture is different, and as I was about to say, this journalist from the BBC asked me about the AI Act and what we are going to see in the unacceptable risk. And I mentioned, unless something changes in the trilogue, we will see remote biometrics in the unacceptable risk. This is what the Parliament has added for the time being. And he told me in complete good faith, what is wrong with that? Don't we already do it anyway? What is different from a policeman stopping you? And I realized that there is a very fundamental difference in the UK and in Europe, because if you go to Eastern Europe or to Germany, everybody will know what is wrong with that, but not in the UK. And it's an example of different cultures. More generally, it is true there is a sense in the UK we can be the place where there is more freedom to explore and experiment and to do enterprise as well. But keep in mind, eventually we're going to have to sell into the European market. And the AI Act doesn't care about where you made your product. If you want to operate in the market, those are going to be the rules. And the UK knows that very well. So the white book may have a lot of purposes, but they know what the markets are and they know what the rules are.
Thank you. But yes, so you can also, I mean, if you want to continue on your first point and close, you have a couple of minutes more. Okay,
well, more generally, it is true that something seems to be changing a bit with generative AI, but let's keep in mind that not so much. I mean, some of the principles and the problems are the same. We never really solved the issue, for example, of persuasive technology. We never really got to the bottom of it. We just decided now we worry about the chatbot. But we should have solved it, because that problem will come back again. It's not nice to leave things unsolved. So you learn a lot from, not so much from what people have done, which is not easy to prove, but what people attempted to do and then maybe failed or claimed. So we all know the story of Cambridge Analytica, which at least claimed in public they wanted to persuade electors based on psychometric data. The investigation in the UK didn't show this happened, but we know what they would have done if they could have. There was a company proposing to do psychometric interviews of refugee asylum seekers in Hungary. they were going to do a motion detection on the mobile phone to predict lies, a lie detector. It didn't work. The technology wasn't working, but now we know what they would do if they could. Learning what people, I know people predicting credit scores based on your Twitter feed and so on. You know, it's endless, the list. We learn from that. Is the current law going to be fit for that, for what people are going to do? Let's keep in mind that regulating banks is important. It's about predicting risk, and that's half of the story. People who make a living out of predicting risk will need to have a law. But there is the other half, people who are the receivers of the machine decisions. So the children watching TV, the children having a conversation with a software who is going to replace their teacher. When a software replaces the teacher and teaches you how to speak or history, it's a very delicate place. Do we have a law now for a history teacher run by GPT-5? So all that is not necessarily covered in the current conversation, but will become a problem unless we understand what people are willing to do if they can.
Thank you very much. So I don't know if Mr. Signorini wanted to add something, or maybe we can go to the Q&A part with the public. Okay. So are you going to maybe collect some questions from the public and then we can answer all of them together? You're going to handle who's going to bring the microphone to, okay, you, perfect. Please.
Hi, thank you all very much for joining us today and for the debate. My name is Ghali Abable, and my question for you is, we've discussed a lot about upholding kind of this AI regulation system for corporations and the general public. And, you know, since law is a system of balancing between the people and the government, I would actually like to know if there's any way in which we should be focusing on also how we should regulate government's use of AI and our own data. Thank you.
Okay, so we can, you know, write down the questions and also please maybe also tell us who you would like to answer, because that would make our job easier. Of course, everybody in the panel can answer questions, but maybe if you have direct questions, it's better.
Hi, sorry, should we? Hi, my name is Jo. I am Italian and German, and I was wondering if perhaps we are limiting the use of AI too much, in the sense that obviously when used by countries such as China, the use of technology such as AI recognition can be negative and almost draconian in its use. But I wonder if perhaps it would be positive, and to what extent maybe we should allow and take the risk of utilizing AI, especially in terms of government.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll do the next. My name is Chiara and I'm a GG2 from Italy. And I would like to ask to you if, in your opinion, the international community will ever be able to detach the AI regulation a little bit from politics and put it more in a technical field. So to try to find common standards without political pressures.
Okay, hello, hi, I'm Giulia Maria, I'm a student from Italy. My question is addressed to Mrs. Gressel, but in general, if you want to answer. I was wondering how the notion of legal subjectivity in a digital environment would change, how legal identity and capacity of act are affected in a digital environment. Thank you.
Good afternoon, my name is Livia Bartolozzi and I'm a GG2 from Italy. My question is, why, in your perspective, does the United States of America have such a less strict and less organic approach towards the regulation of AI if compared to the European Union? Thank you.
Hi, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Helen, I'm in GG2 and I am from Zimbabwe. My question is rather just generic to an extent, but I'm very curious, like the world is turning towards AI, but then if we look at the world that's turning towards AI, it's mostly like the first world. So I was wondering, what role does AI play in third world countries? Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name. Oh, sorry, no. Hi, my name is Adeze, and my question is kind of leading on from Helen's question, because I think someone earlier mentioned, I can't remember, but you mentioned how there's work towards legislation that makes AI less biased. So I wanted to know what role representation plays in that, and what steps you think should be taken towards making sure that AI isn't biased towards a more Western view of things and it's more representative of everyone that's using it around the world.
Okay, I think we've had all the questions, right? Okay. Okay, maybe there's somebody in the back. Yes, please.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And first time, thanks for the organizer and host and the speakers. A wonderful event here. I and my colleague Jerry come from the Chinese embassy in Rome, and we are come here just to listen to the speech. The first is thank you. The second thing I think is for advertisement. Because in next month, November the 8th to 10th in China, we have a big conference. It's called Wuzhen Worldwide Internet Conference. So hope everyone to focus on it, or if you have an opportunity, you can attend it, participate it. And it lasts more than 10 years. Every year it will be held. It will be held. So the last one is for my point is my two questions. The first one is, I know the European Union has, will be, how to say it, publish this legislation for AI Act in future, maybe the later of this year. And I wonder if there is any programming engineers to participate this AI Act, because if you charge some of the companies, such as ChatGPT, they are, how to say, they are not allowed the laws, so you must charge it according to the programming engineers, not for the lawyers or some other subject experts. You must invite the experts which are working on it. So is this AI Act have these terms to regulate it? The second question is for the AI deployment will affect for the employment for the publics. So if the AI progress or develop in future, maybe some of the, or most of the persons will lost their jobs. So is there any acts on protect or to give more education for our publics to get on this AI era? We can not lose so much the unemployment for the AI era. And yeah, that's all. That's my two questions. Thank you, Allo.
Okay, so now to the answering part, which is not going to be so easy, because maybe I can give each panelist a way to answer the questions that they feel that they can add something to. Maybe we can start with Professor Cristianini being connected remotely, especially, I mean, on your side of things. I think it's interesting, the question of separating the political side of things with the technical side of things. And also maybe the last question, what is the contribution of engineers and technicians to the current AI Act legislative process? Are only lawyers talking about this, or is there a good representation of academics and technicians in the drafting of this legislation?
Well, I didn't want to be impolite earlier, but it does feel sometimes that we are forgetting, we are talking about a technical reality. Reality still does exist. And we are talking about a very real technology, which is very, very complex. I would hope that there is an expert in this latest generation of AI in every conversation. Anything short of that is dangerous. So, and this goes for everything. And I don't agree that there should be only technical input. I remember when I started this concerns, I remember it was after the Obama campaign, 2008, because I remember Wired magazine had an article in 2009 about how the micro-targeting team did such a good job. It was very clear in those days how things could evolve, and I became stressed and worried. My end of each speech for years was, we must get more lawyers in the room. We must get, I know I wasn't expecting to say something different today, but perhaps maybe a little bit of an equal amount. Technical reality does matter. We need to regulate something that does exist. The colleague from the Chinese embassy is right. There has to be a certain amount of technical input here. And also the Italian lady before. Now, how do we do it? One example comes right away from the point you made about values and the third world and different countries being represented. It is obviously impossible to talk about a single set of values to put in the machine. It is childish, and having these discussions is always concerning me. And I agree that I would have hoped a social scientist, not an engineer, would come up and say, there is not going to be a permanent set of values that you put in the machine, even just like you are now in Rome. And if you had been in Rome 50 years ago, the values about the position of women would have been different. Things change across the world and across time. So one important technical component is something called steerability. You make a model of this type in such a way that you can prove it can be steered in whichever direction the laws of a given country require. We don't know how to measure steerability. We started. We don't know how to enforce it. It will become a concern because every country will request a certain different type of compliance. And also every different industry, perhaps, and so on and so forth. So these are technical options that must become available. Once they're available, the laws have to reflect it. Otherwise, we're talking about the generic stuff, and it can become dangerous.
Thank you. So I would go to Anna Gressel now. There were a couple of questions that have your name on it. The one on subjectivity and the one on the different American approach to AI regulation. But of course, then feel free to add on to all the other questions.
Thank you. I think these are fantastic questions and commend everyone who asked them. I think I'll start about the question on subjectivity, but I might call that reframing it legal personhood or legal accountability. The question I think really is getting at the issue of how do you decide what is the right legal vehicle for holding someone responsible for the effect of a technology. And I'll just take a pause and say we haven't normally required a legal personhood for every technology that's used. Most technologies are deployed and they're deployed by humans. They're tools in our hands. And I think that there is likely to be a significant proportion of AI that is used as a counterpart to a human and therefore seen as a counterpart or a tool. This includes, kind of co-pilot approaches where you might be using ChatGPT or some other generative AI and producing an output, but then you decide what to do with that output. The machine doesn't decide. I think the question becomes a lot more complex and significant when there is a fully automated system that is making a consequential decision. And I would note this is not an unregulated area. There are a number of laws that get at that, including GDPR and a number of privacy laws in the US that raise the question of how do we think about and control in a fully automated system. And even then, I don't know that we necessarily need legal personhood for a tool to the extent that tool has someone who is responsible for it, whether it's the user or the upstream company that's created the tool. And so, when we're asking these questions of subjectivity, I think what I would say is it's important to think about when that might shift. Is there a moment at which those existing legal frameworks aren't enough. And that's always the question we ask with AI, right? How do our current laws serve us? And when may they not be enough? And I think we're not quite, to my mind, not quite at that point with requiring a legal personhood for AI. Because right now it just is something that we mold, we shape the data that goes in, we shape the use case, we shape I think the response was fantastic just now, we shape the technical guardrails that control the functions of those tools in practice. And right now that's a very human experience, even if there's a technically automated piece of that process. And again, maybe there's a point at which that we'll shift off of that, but I think that's not now. There's a different question though about how to trace responsibility through that technical system and how to allocate it. And I think that's what the EU AI Act is trying to do right now, and that's what we're likely to see in certain cases. Who is responsible for every piece of that process? If you have everyone from the person who collected the data to the person who's deciding what parameters to use when training a foundation model, to the person who tunes it on a company's proprietary data set, and then the person who trains people to use it within a company, and then the people in the company who use it, but then exercise their discretion and then have an impact on someone in the real world. I mean, that's a long, long chain of people who are all involved, potentially from different companies, from different entities, and we have to make choices. I think at some point in the future, there will be some choices about how to think about what liability should look like, what laws get to determine that, and what information has to be transferred at every stage in that process to make sure whatever we do, we kind of know what's going to happen and there's sufficient robustness around that decision-making pipeline. But those are all questions that are being currently worked out, and they are questions that will have a legal component, and they're questions that will have a technical component, because the technical controls here are really helpful. You don't necessarily ask, how do the apps on your phone or how does the software on your computer work the way it does? It does because it kind of comes together with enough control around it that you find it predictable and you find it reliable. And so some of this is about getting to that predictability and reliability with systems that are right now more unpredictable than we're used to, and potentially more difficult to understand and defend than we're used to. So we're kind of in this mode of navigating how to apply all of these frameworks to those tools. I'll note that on the question of the international community and standards, there's a separate panel on that on Thursday, so I would invite everyone to join that panel, and I think the entire discussion will be around that. And finally, on this question of first world versus more global AI, I think that's a fantastic one. And right now, there is a big constraint on that in two ways, I think. First is skills in terms of foundation models. My understanding is there are a small number of people in the world who are adept at creating themselves the big foundation models that power all these apps. And those folks may be concentrated, but I think that will change. The second that I think is very important is on compute. And right now, there's a limited amount of chips and computing power that can be used at scale to train these models. But again, that might change. And I think it is a very important goal for countries across the world to think about how they're participating in this ecosystem, because there are things that are lost when those are too centralized within certain communities, including language. I think that's one where we've seen, for example, the Nordic states have been very vocal about the need to preserve language in these tools and have them work in different linguistic environments. That's not necessarily going to be the case if they're trained on largely English texts. And so that, I think, is a larger conversation that is going to be happening. And it has happened in the AI space, but in this generative AI moment, where those constraints are more forceful, it is, I think, increasingly important to think about how we're distributing some of the resources that may lead to more innovation.
Thank you. So, Mr. Cosentini, I think one of the things that you touched upon before was the question of trust and of reputation of companies. And I think right now that is playing a big role in terms of using AI and abusing AI. I think a lot of companies are using restraint right now because they know and they're afraid of potential misfires with AI. And I've seen it with media companies. That have been some media companies, especially in the US, that have try to publish articles written by AI, and some of them created some really, really bad outcomes. And for instance, Gannett Publishing, which is the biggest company in terms of newspapers, they publish USA Today. They published 77 articles with AI, and then they realized that 44 of them needed to be retracted or corrected afterwards because they had mistakes. And for the moment, I think that that is a big self-regulation going on in companies. But is that enough, and how do you see maybe also the government? The first question was, how are we going to regulate the government use of AI? I know that you work for a private company, but you have worked on that side of things, and oftentimes public administration has to take the example of private companies because they have done the homework before.
Yeah, well, Mr. Benfei explained us about the human oversight. So it's correct. The state of the art, the artificial intelligence solutions are not perfect. So, but you referred about some articles not so good, but in my opinion, I don't know, but maybe are very good draft that a very good professional, a good journalist could work in and transform with not so much effort in a very good article. Well, so the point is that but the point is in the Artificial Intelligence Act that the automated decision has to be confined in a very has to be regulated, and so for a very important process we need a human oversight that supervise the process, supervise the artificial intelligence tools. Is the only way to manage this so powerful technology.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if Mrs. Signorini, did you want to add something and articulate on some of the questions?
We spoke about international standard or something. This is, I imagine that on this specific sector is a good idea, but because otherwise, if you have different regulation, you can have different treatment, and so a competitive disadvantage from area to another area. But in other sector, we have also some sort of standards or some sort of international regulation. On this specific aspect, I think it's more difficult because you have not an international institution in charge to create something at the world level. From one side, on the other side, we see that some national or federal jurisdiction already start with regulation.
Okay, thank you. Now, Dr. Alaimo, for the final, talking points, and please feel free to answer all of the questions from the public that you want to articulate on.
Yes, thank you. Perhaps just a very quick comment around two issues that look to me very important. The first is, can we have a technical standard without political pressure? I think we cannot have, and we shouldn't, because every technical decision is always a political decision in some sense, even within organization. I mean, we know when we study developers, you choose a technology rather than another for a variety of reasons. There are no technical at all, because it's the cheapest, because it's what you already have in the organization, because it's the most diffuse standard. Those are all political decisions. And therefore, it's very, very important for all of us to open up the debate. And I go also to the point about the technical competence here, and to what extent should be, of course, involved in decision-making processes or regulation. very much, but also there are many emergent competencies that do know a bit of technicalities, but do know also a bit of political issue related to AI, or for instance, ethical AI issue, or many other indeed professional figures, and perhaps I also do answer a little bit to the concern about jobs here, that are emerging because things are changing, not just in the way organization, the private sector work, but the way in which the public sector work. And you have listened Brando Benifei saying we will create institution here because we cannot otherwise enforce this regulatory project that we have around the whole digital economy and of course about AI. So I think this is a very important point for me, and is also very much linked to the issue and to the question about bias and the issue of the developing world. So there cannot be data sets that are unbiased, because data are the way we look at the world and is always a point of view. But there is a lot of things, there are lots of things, many things that we can do and we should do, both technically, politically, and at the level of society, to open up even here to more participatory decision-making processes, to more participatory design, decentralized governance that will somehow sort of advance, let's say, what we are, the situation we are right now, which is indeed a situation in which there is a dominant view of the world in the data, in the technology, in the economy. Just an anecdote, I was talking to a colleague from South Africa, and he was telling me, look, very often our own governments or institution or organization, they trade off safety for the cheapest solution. And why not? We also have the right of having certain technologies, and we don't care about other things. There is, what I want to say that there is a trade-off, and there are issues that are very, very complex, but indeed they should be discussed and brought up for discussion. Things are moving forward, thankfully, but there is a lot of work to be done, and indeed we hope that much of this work can be done by you. And I think that perhaps on these notes, inviting notes.
It's a great note to close on. So I want to thank all our panelists for being with us today, and thank you guys in the public, in the audience, for following this event. Thanks to the Diplomacy Festival and Centro Studi Americani, and I will, encourage you to follow other events of this great festival that will go on the whole week. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Cristianini.